photography is back in a big way, and it looks like it's here to stay, with brand new film stocks hitting the market and even brand new 35mm cameras being produced. It's an exciting time to dive in. Maybe you're here because the holidays wrapped up and you just unwrapped granddad's old Pentax K1000 in a roll of black and white film. And you're curious and you're thinking, hey, maybe I'll give this a shot. If that sounds like you, you're in the right place. Today, I'm offering up some tips for beginners who are just getting started out in this expansive world of analog photography. And there's a lot to get to, so much so that I had to split it up into 2 videos, so let's not waste any more time and just jump in. So my advice in the beginning is to familiarize yourself with the cost of film photography. It isn't like digital in the sense that there's an upfront cost and then that slowly turns into some sort of investment over time. In theory, you could buy a digital camera and then charge people for portrait sessions or something, and within a year or 2, you could pay off that camera. Now, film is obviously different because not only would you pay for the camera, but you're paying for the film that you're going to be shooting, and then most likely if you're starting out, development and scanning costs from a photo lab. More on that in just a little bit. I want to run through some actual numbers because I think it'll help put some things into context. I would consider myself a moderate film shooter, averaging around 4 or 5 rolls of film every month, but let's aim high and say 5. The cheapest film available right now on B&H's website is Arista-Edu Ultra 200, which clocks in at roughly $6 per roll. If I shoot 5 rolls a month for 12 months of the cheapest available film, I'd be spending $360 a year on just purchasing the film. Now, the lab that I go to develop my film, Exposure Therapy, here in Brooklyn, has tiered development and scanning price options. Their cheapest option, which is wonderful and suits my needs generally, is $10 per roll. So once again, 5 rolls per month, $10 development and scan. For 12 months, we're looking at $600 every year. So $600 plus $350 is $950 per year at the cheapest end. And for a number that will also help put a lot of this into context, since February 25th of 2022, I have spent a minimum of $2,377 at Exposure Therapy, which, to remind you, is just primarily the development and scanning of the film. If we want an accurate total number, we can double that due to the cost of the film itself, and we get around $4,754, round that up to $5,000 in about a 3-year span. Now, I omitted a pretty important cost, the camera or the cameras if you plan on owning more than one. Now, camera prices can vary wildly, and I'm going to talk in the next section about carefully selecting your gear, but just for a little bit of context on how tricky this could be, I recently bought a Nikon F3 for about $350 on Facebook Marketplace. This camera on eBay ranges from around $300 to $550. It's not exactly an exact science when we're talking about half a century old pre-owned equipment, but that's a good segue into the next section. When you're just starting out with film photography, one of the most important decisions you'll make is choosing your camera and your gear. This isn't just about finding something that fits your budget, it's about finding tools that will help you learn and grow as a photographer. I always recommend starting out with a manual SLR camera rather than a point and shoot. Why is that, you might ask? Well, because manual cameras give you full control over key settings like shutter speed, aperture, and focus. And this hands-on experience is invaluable for understanding how each setting is going to impact your image. With a point and shoot camera, much of this process is automated, so while it's convenient, you're missing out on a big part of the learning curve that makes film photography so rewarding. When you're choosing your first camera, take time to do your research. Look into trusted brands like Canon, Nikon, Minolta, Olympus, Pentax. Cameras like the Canon AE1, the Nikon FM2, or the Pentax K1000 are often recommended for beginners because they're durable, they're relatively affordable, and they're easy to find online or in thrift stores. Another tip is to read reviews and watch tutorials on specific models that you're considering buying. I do this all the time. In fact, I just recently did it when I bought the Nikon F3. I watched a ton of different videos just to make sure that I was certain that I wanted to actually buy the camera. YouTube is an incredible resource for this stuff, with tons of videos showcasing different cameras and how they work. Look for videos that explain how to load the film, how to adjust the settings, and even troubleshoot some of the issues that you might encounter when you get the camera. The more you understand your camera before you buy it, the smoother your experience is going to be. Now, this is a subject that I feel at some point I'm going to actually make an entire video about because there's a lot of nuance to it that I think is important to note. But for now, here's a quick little rundown of the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle represents the relationship between three key camera settings: your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. Together, these three things determine how much light is going to reach your film and how your final image is going to look. Think of it like a balancing act. When you adjust one setting, it means compensating with another. So let me break it down as quickly as I can, starting with aperture. The aperture is the opening in your lens that controls how much light passes through your film. It's measured in what are called f-stops, like f2.8 or f16. A lower f-stop number means a wider aperture, which lets in more light, while a higher f-stop number means a smaller aperture, letting in less light. Next, let's talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed controls how long the camera's shutter stays open, exposing the film to light. It's measured in fractions of a second, like 1/250th of a second or 1/30th of a second. Faster shutter speeds, like 1/500th of a second, freezes motion, which is great for action shots and sports photos. Slower speeds, like 1/15th of a second, allow more light in, but could also lead to things like motion blur. If you're using a slower shutter speed, using a tripod is definitely going to help keeping your photos sharp. When shooting handheld, it's essential to keep your shutter speed at 1/60th of a second or faster if you want clean, sharp images. Anything slower than 1/60th of a second increases the risk of camera shake, which can result in blurry photos, especially if you're not using a tripod. This is because your hands naturally have small, involuntary movements when you take a photo that become noticeable at slower shutter speeds. As a general rule, if you're unsure, prioritize a faster shutter speed to ensure that your images are sharp and clear. Next, let's talk about ISO. ISO refers to the sensitivity of your film to light. In digital photography, you can adjust your ISO on the fly, but with film, it's determined by the type of film that you load into your camera, whether it be ISO 100, 400, or 800, and you will always see this number on the box of the film that you get. Lower ISO films, like ISO 100, are less sensitive to light and produce finer grain, making them great for bright sunny days. Higher ISO films like ISO 800 or more are more sensitive to light and better for low light situations, but they tend to have more noticeable grain. One thing that's important to note when talking about exposure of your images is that a lot of manual SLR cameras actually come equipped with a light meter inside of them. I would say if you're starting out, it's important to try to find a camera with a working light meter, and these light meters are going to come in different forms, but essentially, they're going to help you determine what settings are best for the scene that you're trying to capture. And this goes back to the last section about choosing your camera gear carefully, because you want to pick something that's going to make your life easier and also give you the tools necessary to learn. And on that note, I want to move on to the next tip. This is something that I don't hear a lot of film photographers talking about, maybe because it involves the dreaded D word, digital. But when I was starting out, I learned a lot by using a digital camera to preview my photos. At the time, I was shooting this Canon FTB QL, and it has a broken light meter inside of it. I've tried replacing the batteries and everything. It just doesn't work. And after countless failed attempts at the Sunny 16 rule, I decided to carry my Canon Rebel T5 alongside me when I went out on photo walks. So here's how it works. Set your digital camera to manual mode and match the ISO to the film that you're using. Take a photo of your scene and adjust the settings until the image looks right. Then transfer those settings onto your film camera. It's not going to be a perfect one-to-one match, but it'll get you close enough. And over time, you'll start to develop an intuition for exposure, and you might not even need the digital preview anymore. Now, some people might ask, why not just shoot digital if you're going to do this? But that mindset just overlooks how modern technology can help you learn the fundamentals of older tools. Using a digital camera as a teaching aid is just another step in the journey. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about it. I certainly didn't. And at the end of the day, it's about learning what works for you and growing as a photographer. One of the great things about shooting negative film, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit later, is its tolerance for overexposure. Unlike digital, where highlights can clip and become irrecoverable, negative film handles overexposure gracefully. In fact, underexposure is usually far more problematic as it leads to muddy shadows and lack of detail. This unique response makes negative film overexposure friendly. Popular films like Portra 400 can be overexposed 1, 2, or even 3 stops and still produce beautiful results. On the other hand, underexposure is always risky. Without enough light, shadows can become featureless and dull with no detail to recover. That's why you'll often hear the phrase meter for the shadows when you're shooting negative film. By metering for the darkest part of your scene, you ensure that the shadows always get enough light, even if it means slightly overexposing the highlights, because negative film can handle it. So when in doubt, just always err on the side of overexposure. And there's a bit of a rule of thumb that I even go to when I'm out shooting. If I'm shooting 200 speed color negative film like Kodak Color Plus, I'm going to set my ISO dial on my camera to 100 ISO. This essentially means that my camera is registering that I have 100 speed ISO film in my camera, therefore it's going to be exposing every image I take by 1 stop over. There are many other methods that you could use for doing this, but this is the one that I feel works best for me. And this isn't a hard and fast rule or anything like that. You could feel free to shoot 200 ISO speed film at 200 ISO and your results may look just fine. But just know that if you find yourself in a situation where you accidentally overexpose an image by 1 or 2 stops, you're most likely going to be okay. On this note, I want to put a link in the description to one of my favorite YouTubers on YouTube. His name is Kyle McDougall. He has an excellent video about why or why not you should overexpose your film photos, and it's really a great resource, and he's really a great photographer and a great guy, so check out that video, and it'll help kind of clarify this part that I'm talking about so that I can move on. Believe it or not, there are countless stories of beginners shooting their first roll of film, getting to the end, and expecting their images to magically appear on the strip of film ready to view. This misunderstanding may come from the popularity of Polaroids and instant film, which has created a bit of a cultural misconception that all film is instant film. But with 35mm and other traditional film formats, the process is different. When you shoot your film, light is captured on the photosensitive emulsion, imprinting an image. However, this image is invisible until the film undergoes chemical development. And the film is still sensitive to light, so you want to make sure not to expose it to any additional light once you've taken all of your photos. The development process involves specific steps, bathing the film in chemicals to essentially draw out the latent image, making it visible and stable. Only after this process can the film be viewed as negatives and then scanned or printed. And I want to reiterate, there's nothing wrong with not knowing this at first. Film photography can feel like an intimidating world with lots of rules and jargon. Too often, seasoned shooters will scoff or roll their eyes at beginners who make this mistake, but without proper guidance, it's easy to understand why someone might think that the images should already be visible on the film strip. The important thing to recognize is that shooting the film is only half the process. The magic really comes to life in the development stage. Whether you take your film to a lab or try developing it at home, this step is essential to bringing your photos to life. And I'm going to end this video there. Like I said at the top, there's going to be a part 2 to this video that comes out next week, and it's going to consist of tips that come after you've done the shooting part of shooting film. I'm hoping that these tips are useful to some newcomers out there, and as always with any of my videos, I feel like I don't say this enough, but if anyone out there has any questions, I am easily accessible both on here, on YouTube, and also on my social media accounts. Most likely Instagram, that's the one that I check the most. So you could follow me on Instagram and reach out if you have any questions whatsoever. Be sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel. And let me know in the comments if there are any tips that you wish I had mentioned in this portion of the video. Let me know what tips you would give to someone who's starting out with film photography in 2025. You can help support me by finding the join button and becoming a member for a few bucks a month. You can help me continue making videos like this. You could also support me by going to my print shop and consider buying a print of my work. And don't forget to check out this video that I made about a novel that I self-published in the summer of last year. I promise I'm only going to mention this a few more times this year. And yeah, it would be a great way to support me by supporting my writing and supporting my work. That'll do it for me on this video. Check out part 2 next week. And if you're watching this in the future, there's a strong chance that it's already available to you. So go check that out for more tips on becoming a film photographer in 2025. And I'll see you all next time.